The blood on Commander Marcus Kane's face had dried into a dark mask, but he stood tall in the center of the grand arena as thousands of alien eyes watched him from the seats above. He had done the impossible, and everyone in the Valkyrie Empire knew it. 12 champions had faced him in ritual combat, and 12 champions had fallen to his blade. The finest warriors the Empire had ever produced now lay defeated because of one human soldier who refused to die. The arena stretched vast and golden around him, its walls carved with the faces of ancient emperors who had ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. None of them had ever seen anything like what happened today. High above on a throne made of living crystal sat Emperor Thalvern, his 4 eyes burning with cold fury as he looked down at the human who had humiliated his entire civilization. The Emperor was ancient beyond human understanding, his gray skin marked with the scars of countless wars, his mind so powerful that he could crush a man's thoughts with a single glance. Yet today, he had no choice but to honor the old laws. Human, the Emperor spoke, and his voice echoed through the arena like thunder. You have won the trial of champions and ended the war between our peoples. By the ancient codes that bind even me, you have earned a reward. Marcus wiped the blood from his eyes and looked up at the alien ruler without fear. Name your price, the Emperor continued, and if it is within my power to grant, it shall be yours. Territory, weapons, ships, wealth beyond imagination, speak your desire. The court waited in silence as diplomats and nobles and warriors all leaned forward to hear what the human would demand. Surely, he would ask for the conquered human colonies to be returned. Or perhaps he would demand the Emperor's own flagship as a trophy. Marcus had fought for 3 days straight without rest, and his body screamed with exhaustion, but his mind remained sharp as he looked past the Emperor to the shadows behind the throne. 7 figures stood there, veiled in silken light, each one radiating power that made the air itself tremble. These were the imperial princesses, daughters of the Emperor, each one a legend in her own right. The first princess could break minds with a thought, and the second could see the future itself. The third commanded the loyalty of 1 billion soldiers, and the fourth could heal any wound or create any plague. The fifth controlled the Empire's wealth, and the sixth was said to be the most beautiful creature in the known universe. And then there was the 7th. Marcus pointed directly at the smallest figure, the one who stood furthest from the throne, the one whose veil seemed to hang heavy with shame rather than mystery. I choose a bride, Marcus said clearly. I want the 7th princess as my wife. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Then the Emperor laughed, a terrible sound like grinding stone, and the entire court joined him in, mocking the foolish human who had thrown away the greatest prize in the galaxy. The 7th princess, the Emperor said when his laughter finally died. You could have had worlds, human, and you choose Lyra, the Hollow. The other princesses whispered and giggled behind their veils, and the nobles shook their heads at the stupidity of this primitive creature. Marcus said nothing as the court mocked him. He simply waited. Everyone in the Empire knew about the 7th princess and her shame. She had been born without the psionic powers that defined her species, making her less than nothing in a civilization built on mental abilities, where her sisters could move objects with their minds and read thoughts across vast distances. Lyra could do nothing at all. She was called the Hollow One, the Empty Princess, the defective daughter, a political embarrassment, hidden away from public view. Emperor's amusement faded into contempt as he waved a dismissive hand toward his youngest daughter. So be it, he declared. Take our greatest shame as your prize, human. Perhaps you deserve each other. Guards moved forward and roughly pulled Lyra from the shadows, pushing her toward the arena floor where Marcus waited. Her veil fell away as she stumbled, revealing a face of haunting beauty marked by silver eyes that held no emotion. She was smaller than her sisters and thinner too, her body lacking the robust health that psionic energy gave to her kind. She looked fragile and broken, like a bird with clipped wings. The court watched with amusement as the Hollow Princess was delivered to her new husband like unwanted cargo, but Marcus noticed something that no one else saw as Lyra approached him across the bloody sand of the arena. Her silver eyes met his with perfect clarity. There was no fear in them, no despair, no resignation, only a sharp intelligence that had been hiding behind a mask of submission for her entire life. She recognized him somehow. And more importantly, she understood exactly what was happening. "My lord," she said quietly as she reached him, playing the role of the obedient prize. "I am yours." Marcus took her hand gently, a gesture so different from the violence he had shown in battle that even the mocking nobles fell silent for a moment. "No," he said softly so only she could hear. "We are each other's." The wedding ceremony was brief and humiliating by design. The Emperor wanted the human to feel the weight of his foolish choice, wanted him to see how little the Empire valued this broken daughter. Priests rushed through the sacred words, and nobles turned their backs in disrespect. Even the servants looked at Lyra with open contempt as she stood beside the bloody human warrior. But through it all, Marcus noticed how Lyra's sisters kept their distance from her, not out of disgust, but out of something that looked almost like caution. The first princess especially watched her youngest sister with eyes that held a secret fear when the ceremony ended. Guards escorted the newlyweds to a small transport vessel waiting in the palace docks. It was old and poorly maintained, a deliberate insult from an emperor who wanted the galaxy to know how little this marriage meant. "You will be taken to the border territories," a court official announced with barely hidden amusement. "There you may live out your days in whatever primitive happiness humans find satisfying." Marcus bowed with exaggerated respect, hiding his smile. Everything was going exactly according to plan as the transport lifted off, and the golden spires of the capital faded behind them. Lyra finally allowed her mask to crack. "You are either the stupidest human who ever lived," she said quietly, "or you know something that terrifies me." Marcus turned to face his new wife, and for the first time since entering the arena, he allowed himself to truly smile. "I know exactly what you are, princess," he said, "and I know exactly why your father was so happy to give you away. The question is, do you know why that happiness is the biggest mistake he has ever made?" Lyra stared at him with those silver eyes, and slowly, carefully, she smiled back. "Tell me," she whispered. "Tell me everything." And as their ship carried them toward the stars, Marcus began to explain why the weakest princess in the Empire was actually the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. The transport ship moved slowly through the darkness between stars, its old engines groaning with each jump through hyperspace as Marcus and Lyra sat alone in the small cabin that would be their home for the next several days. The crew avoided them completely, partly because they had orders to show disrespect to the Hollow Princess, and partly because they feared the human warrior who had killed 12 champions with his bare hands. This suited Marcus perfectly. He needed privacy for the conversation that was about to change. Everything. Lyra sat across from him with her hands folded in her lap, her silver eyes watching him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion that she no longer tried to hide. "You promised to tell me everything," she said. "So tell me, why did you choose me when you could have had anything in the Empire?" Marcus leaned forward and spoke in a low voice, knowing that the ship almost certainly had listening devices hidden in the walls. "What do you know about your mother?" he asked. The question clearly surprised her, and for a moment her careful mask slipped to reveal old pain beneath. "My mother died when I was young," Lyra said slowly. "I was told she was a concubine from a conquered world, a war prize given to my father as tribute. She was considered beneath notice, just as I am considered beneath notice. That is what they told you, Marcus agreed. But it is not the truth. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, a data crystal that contained information worth more than planets. Your mother was human, Lyra. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chun, and she was one of the greatest scientists Earth ever produced. Lyra's silver eyes went wide as she processed this impossible information. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the crystal from Marcus. 30 years ago, Marcus continued, your mother was captured during the first Valkyrie invasion of human space. She was brought to the Imperial Palace as a curiosity, a primitive creature to be studied and displayed. But your father made a mistake. He underestimated her intelligence, just as he underestimates all humans. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace to refuel, but neither of them noticed. They were too caught up in the story that connected their two species. Your mother spent 10 years in the palace, watching and learning and planning. She understood Valkyrie biology better than most Valkyrie scientists because she studied it without the assumptions that blinded them. Marcus paused to let his words sink in, and then she gave birth to you. And everything changed. Lyra shook her head slowly, struggling to accept what she was hearing. I do not understand, she whispered. What does my birth have to do with anything? Everything, Marcus said firmly, because your mother immediately understood what the Valkyrie could not. You were not born broken. Lyra, you were born different. And that difference terrified your father more than any army ever could. He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the distant stars as he explained the truth that had been hidden for 3 decades. Every Valkyrie has psionic abilities, every single one without exception. It is the foundation of your entire civilization, the source of your power. The thing that makes your species believe they are superior to all others. But you have none of these abilities. And your father assumed that meant you were defective. Marcus turned back to face her with intensity burning in his eyes. He was wrong. You do not lack psionic power. Lyra, you negate it. You are what human scientists call a null field, a living zone where psionic energy simply cannot exist. The color drained from Lyra's face as the implications of his words became clear. Anyone who gets close to you loses their abilities. Marcus continued. Not forever, but for as long as they remain in your presence. The mighty Valkyrie nobles become ordinary creatures within arm's reach of you. That is why your sisters always kept their distance. That is why the guards never touched you. That is why your father hid you away from the court. Lyra's hands were shaking now, as years of confusion suddenly began to make terrible sense. I always thought they hated me because I was weak, she said softly. But they feared me because I made them weak. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. Your father's divine psionic mandate. His power to rule the empire through mental domination. None of it works within your presence. You are living proof that his authority is not absolute. He knelt before her and took her trembling hands in his steady ones. Your mother understood all of this. And she knew that one day you could be the key to freeing billions of people from psionic tyranny. She spent her final years getting a message to Earth, telling us about you and what you could do. She died making sure that information reached human intelligence. Tears streamed down Lyra's face, tears for a mother she barely remembered, tears for a truth she had never known, tears for a life spent believing she was worthless. The war, she said suddenly, her voice thick with emotion. The war that brought you here was designed to put me in that arena, Marcus finished for her. Everything, the battles, the negotiations, the trial of champions, all of it was a plan 30 years in the making to get me close. Enough to claim you. Humanity did not come to conquer your empire, Lyra. We came to rescue you. She pulled her hands away and stood abruptly, pacing the small cabin as her mind raced through the implications. If what you say is true, then my father will realize his mistake soon. He will send my sisters to retrieve me, and they will come with armies. I'm counting on it, Marcus said calmly. Lyra stopped pacing and stared at him. You want them to come? I want them to underestimate you one last time, Marcus explained. Your sisters are the most powerful psionics in the galaxy, but they have never fought without their abilities. They have never faced an enemy they could not read, could not dominate, could not crush with thought alone. He smiled grimly. Humans have fought our entire history without psionic powers. We learned to be dangerous through training, through tactics, through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. When your sisters come for us, they will expect to face helpless prey. Instead, they will face something far worse. They will face equals. Lyra considered his words carefully, her brilliant mind sharpened by a lifetime of surviving without the advantages her sisters enjoyed working. Through the strategy, you want to use me as a weapon, she said. Flatly, I want to give you a choice, Marcus corrected. You can come with me to human space and live in safety. Or you can help us change the galaxy forever. Your mother believed that the Velkari people deserved freedom from psionic tyranny. She believed that her daughter could be the key to that freedom. But the choice is yours, Lyra. It always has been. The transport ship hummed around them as Lyra stood silent, weighing a decision that would shape the fate of civilizations. Finally, she raised her silver eyes to meet his gaze with a determination that transformed her entire being. My whole life, I was told I was nothing, she said quietly. I was told I was broken, defective, shameful. Now you tell me that everything I believed was a lie, that my weakness is actually strength, that my emptiness is actually power. She stepped closer to him, and Marcus could feel the strange absence that surrounded her, the null field that made even his ordinary human senses seem somehow sharper, clearer, more real. Teach me, Lyra commanded. Teach me to be the weapon my mother knew I could become. Marcus grinned and extended his hand. Welcome to humanity, Princess. She took his hand firmly, and in that moment, a partnership was born that would shake the foundations of an empire behind them. Stars streaked past the window as their ship carried them toward destiny, and far away in the Imperial Palace, Emperor Thalvern woke from a nightmare he could not remember, feeling for the first time in centuries something he thought he had forgotten: fear. Word traveled fast through the Velkari Empire, carried on psionic whispers that moved faster than light itself. The human had discovered something about the seventh princess, something important, something dangerous, something that made the emperor himself grow pale with rage when his spies reported the conversations from the transport ship within 3 days of the wedding. The first Princess Sithora received her orders directly from her father's mind: find her sister, discover what the humans knew, and eliminate the threat by any means necessary. Sithor was called the Mindbreaker for good reason. She had crushed rebellions with thought alone, driven enemy commanders to madness from across star systems, and never once failed a mission her father had given her. She assembled a war fleet of 300 ships and set out to hunt the weakest member of her family. The other sisters followed for their own reasons. The second princess wanted to prove she could see a future that her father could not, while the third princess brought her personal guard of 1 million soldiers, eager to demonstrate her military superiority. Even the sixth princess, famous only for her beauty, joined the hunt, sensing that something historic was about to happen and wanting to witness it firsthand. Meanwhile, Marcus and Lyra had reached the border territories, a lawless stretch of space where the Empire's control was weakest and where human ships waited in hidden positions throughout the asteroid fields. Here, far from the golden palaces and psionic networks of the core worlds, they began Lyra's true education. Your null field extends about 15 meters in every direction, Marcus explained as they trained in an abandoned mining station. Anyone who enters that zone loses access to their psionic abilities completely. Lyra stood in the center of the cargo bay, concentrating on the strange emptiness that had always surrounded her. "I spent my whole life thinking this feeling was loneliness," she said softly. "I thought the silence in my head was because no one wanted to connect with me. That silence is your greatest weapon." Marcus told her, "Your sisters hear thousands of voices, constantly thoughts, emotions, psionic communications from across the galaxy. They have never experienced true quiet." He handed her a simple combat knife. "When they enter your field, that silence will hit them like a physical blow. They will be disoriented, confused, terrified, and you need to be ready to act in that moment." The training was brutal and relentless. Marcus pushed Lyra harder than anyone had ever pushed her before, teaching her hand-to-hand combat techniques that humans had developed over thousands of years of warfare. She learned to use her small size as an advantage, to strike at vulnerable points, to move with speed and precision that required no psionic enhancement. "Your sisters have never trained their bodies," Marcus explained as they sparred. "Why would they bother when their minds can do everything for them?" He blocked her strike and countered with a sweep that sent her to the ground. "But you have been living in a psionic-free zone your entire life. Your muscles, your reflexes, your instincts, they are already better than any Valkyrie noble because they actually had to develop naturally." Lyra climbed to her feet and attacked again. Faster this time, more confident. "I am beginning to understand why humans are so dangerous," she said between breaths. "You have been fighting without advantages for your entire existence as a species. We turned our weakness into strength." Marcus agreed. "Just like you will." The days passed quickly as Lyra transformed. From a sheltered princess into something new, a warrior who combined Valkyrie intelligence with human fighting spirit. She learned to shoot human weapons with accuracy that surprised even Marcus. She memorized tactics and strategies that had won battles against impossible odds. She studied the weaknesses of her own people with the analytical mind of a scientist, and slowly, she began to understand the scope of the human plan. The war was never about territory. She realized one evening as they reviewed intelligence reports. "You let the Empire win those early battles on purpose." Marcus nodded with respect for her quick understanding. "We needed to look weak enough that your father would agree to the trial of champions. He would never have risked it if he thought humans were a real threat. So you sacrificed soldiers, ships, entire colonies, all to get one man into that arena." "I volunteered," Marcus said simply. "Every human who died in this war knew what they were fighting for. They knew that one day, their sacrifice would lead to the liberation of billions." Lyra fell silent, overwhelmed by the scope of the commitment humans had made to a plan that might never have worked. Before she could respond, alarms began screaming throughout the station. "They found us," Marcus said, already moving toward the command center. "Your sister's fleet just entered the system." Lyra followed him to the viewport and saw the sky filling with warships, hundreds of them, each one bristling with weapons that could destroy planets, and at the center of the formation, unmistakable in its golden magnificence, flew the flagship of the First Princess. "Sithara is hailing us," a human officer reported from the communication station. Marcus looked at Lyra with a question in his eyes. This was her choice to make. She straightened her spine and faced the viewport with royal dignity that her family had always denied she possessed. "Put her through." The air shimmered as a holographic projection appeared before them, Sithara the Mindbreaker in all her terrifying glory. Her psionic aura so powerful that even the projection seemed to crackle with energy. "Little sister," Sithara said with mocking sweetness, "Father is very disappointed in you. Running away with your human pet was embarrassing enough, but sharing family secrets with the enemy?" She shook her head slowly. "That is treason, Lyra. You know the punishment for treason." Lyra met her sister's projection without flinching. "I know many things now, sister. I know what I am, and I know what you are afraid of. The question is, are you brave enough to come and face me yourself?" or will you hide behind your fleet like a coward? Cythera's eyes narrowed dangerously. You think your human tricks have made you powerful? She hissed. You think a few weeks of training can compete with abilities I have wielded since birth? I think you have never faced anyone you could not dominate, Lyra replied calmly. And I think that makes you weak in ways you cannot imagine. The hologram flickered as Cythera's rage disrupted her concentration. I will tear the thoughts from your human's mind, she promised. I will make him tell me everything, and then I will make him kill you himself before I end his miserable existence. You will try, Lyra said simply. And then she cut the transmission. Marcus was already giving orders. His human crew moving with practiced efficiency to battle stations throughout the station. The first wave of scouts will reach us in 2 hours, he reported. The main fleet will follow shortly after. Lyra looked at the approaching Armada 300 warships against one mining station and a handful of hidden human vessels. The odds were impossible, but she had spent her entire life being told she was impossible. And here she stood anyway. Tell me the plan, she said to Marcus. He grinned then. Same confident smile he had worn in the arena when facing 12 champions. The plan is to show your sister what happens when gods have to fight like mortals. The plan is to remind the galaxy why they should never underestimate humans. The plan, he finished, is to win. Outside the viewport, the first Valkyrie ships began their approach. Their psionic crews confident in their absolute superiority. They had no idea what was waiting for them. They had no idea that the hunt was about to become a trap. The battle began in the asteroid field, known as the Shattered Nebula, where the remains of a dead civilization still orbited a dying red star. Marcus had chosen this location carefully. The dense rocks and ancient debris would break up the Valkyrie formations, forcing their ships to fight individually rather than as a coordinated fleet. More importantly, the psionic static from the old alien ruins would interfere with the mental links that allowed Valkyrie crews to operate as a single mind for the first time in their history. The greatest warriors of the Empire would have to fight almost like humans, but not quite. The first princess watched from her flagship as her scouts entered the asteroid field. Their psionic crews scanning for the human vessels that intelligence had promised would be hiding here. They are using the rocks as cover, her tactical officer reported. I am detecting approximately 30 small ships scattered throughout the field. Cythera laughed at the pathetic numbers. 30 ships against 300, she said with amusement. This will not even qualify as entertainment. She gave the order to advance, and her fleet moved into the nebula like a golden tide of death. That was when everything went wrong. The human ships did not behave like any enemy the Valkyrie had ever faced. They did not form defensive lines or attempt organized retreats. They attacked from every direction at once, appearing from behind asteroids and disappearing before return fire could find them. Worse, they used tactics that made no sense to the psionic minds, trying to anticipate their movements. One human frigate flew directly into the path of a Valkyrie destroyer, and the crew assumed it was attempting to surrender until the frigate launched its entire missile payload at point-blank range and then rammed what remained of the destroyer's bridge. The human crew ejected seconds before impact, their escape pods scattering into the asteroids while their ship became a weapon of pure destruction. They are insane, the tactical officer stammered. They are actually insane. Across the battlefield, similar scenes of madness unfolded. Human pilots flew suicide runs against ships 10 times their size. Human gunners fired nuclear weapons as distractions rather than killing blows. Human engineers overloaded their own reactors to create improvised explosions that took out clusters of enemy vessels. The Valkyrie could not understand it. Why would anyone fight like this, with such complete disregard for their own survival? They did not understand that humans had fought for survival against impossible odds since the beginning of their species. They did not understand that every human in this battle knew exactly what they were fighting for and had made peace with the cost by the time the main fleet reached the center of the asteroid field. They had lost 40 ships to 30 human vessels, and the human fleet was still fighting. Zithara screamed her frustration into the minds of her remaining captains, demanding they crush these primitive creatures and end this humiliation. And then a single ship emerged from the chaos, a small transport vessel flying directly toward her flagship with no weapons visible and no escort protection. Tactical officer recognized it immediately. "That is the transport we sent them away on," he said with confusion. "The seventh princess is aboard." Zithara smiled with cruel anticipation. "She comes to surrender," the first princess declared. "Bring her aboard. I want to look into her eyes when I destroy her human lover's mind." The transport docked without resistance, and Zithara walked to the landing bay with her personal guard, 12 elite psionics, who could kill with a thought. The airlock opened and Marcus walked out first. Unarmed and apparently alone, Zithara reached out with her mind to seize control of his thoughts, to freeze him in place, to begin the slow process of tearing every secret from his brain, and felt nothing. Her power simply stopped at the edge of an invisible wall, dissolving like smoke in wind. "What?" she started to say, then Lyra stepped out behind Marcus, and the world changed. The null field hit Zithara like a physical blow. One moment she was a goddess of psionic might, and the next she was simply a woman standing in a metal room with no powers at all. Her guards collapsed around her, screaming in terror as their mental links severed and their enhanced senses went dark. They had never experienced silence, never felt so alone, never faced a moment without their abolition. Zithara stumbled backward, her hand shaking as she tried desperately to reach the power that had defined her entire existence. "What have you done to me?" she shrieked at her sister. Lyra walked forward calmly, and with each step, the null field pushed deeper into the flagship. "I have done nothing," Lyra said quietly. "I have simply stopped doing what I always did, hiding myself, making myself small, pretending I was less than I am." She looked at the guards writhing on the floor. "Your soldiers are not injured, sister. They are just ordinary now, like I have been ordinary my entire life." Marcus moved through the disabled guards efficiently, disarming them and securing their hands with quick movements that showed years of training. They offered no resistance because they had never learned to fight without their powers. "How?" Zithara demanded. "How is this possible?" "I was born this way," Lyra explained. "Mother understood it even if father never did. I am not broken. Zithara, I am the opposite of broken. I am the one thing that can make all of you equal." Alarms began sounding throughout the flagship as the null field expanded beyond the landing bay. Bridge officers found their mental coordination failing. Gunners lost their enhanced targeting abilities. And the captain suddenly realized he could no longer control his ship through thought alone. The flagship began to drift as its psionic system shut down one by one. Marcus activated his communicator. "All human ships. The flagship is disabled. Begin Phase 2. Throughout the shattered nebula, hidden human vessels emerged from their positions and targeted the now disorganized Valkyrie fleet. Without their command ship coordinating the mental network, the other captains had to rely on ordinary communications, a system they barely knew how to use. The battle turned from a hunt into a massacre. But the massacre was no longer in the Empire's favor. Zithara fell to her knees before her younger sister, tears streaming down her face as she experienced true helplessness for the first time in her life. "Please," she begged, "please make it stop. I cannot bear this silence." Lyra looked down at the sister who had mocked her for 30 years, who had called her hollow and empty and worthless, who had been sent to kill her as casually as one might swat an insect. She could have felt triumph in this moment. She could have felt revenge, satisfaction, cruel joy instead. She felt something unexpected. Pity. This is how I have felt every day of my life, Lyra said softly. This silence you cannot bear. I have lived in it since I was born. She knelt to meet her sister's eyes, and I survived. Sithara. I learned to think for myself, to see clearly, to find strength in the quiet. You can learn too, if you choose. Or you can spend the rest of your life afraid of what I represent. The battle outside the viewport was ending. Human ships moved through the wreckage of the once mighty fleet, accepting surrenders from crews too shocked to continue fighting. The other princesses who had joined the hunt watched in horror as their eldest sister's flagship went dark. And one by one, they gave the order to retreat. They fled back to the core worlds, carrying with them the terrible news that would shake the foundations of their civilization. The Hollow Princess was hollow no longer, and the Empire would never be the same. Stood beside Lyra as the flagship's bridge crew surrendered, their hands raised in the universal gesture of defeat. What do you want to do with her? He asked, nodding towards Sithara. Lyra considered for a long moment. We send her home, she finally decided. We send her home to tell our father what happened here. Let him know that his greatest shame just destroyed his finest fleet. Let him know that I'm coming. Marcus smiled grimly. And then Lyra looked out at the stars, seeing not just points of light, but billions of people living under psionic tyranny. And then she said, we finish what my mother started. We set them all free. The broadcast reached every world in the Valkyrie Empire at the same moment, transmitted through psionic channels and electronic networks simultaneously, so that no citizen could claim they had not heard it. Princess Lyra stood before the cameras on the captured flagship, her silver eyes steady and her voice clear as she addressed billions of people for the first time in her life. My name is Lyra, seventh daughter of Emperor Thalvern, and I have been called many things. The Hollow One, the Empty Princess, the Defective Daughter. She paused to let those words sink in. Today, I am here to tell you the truth about those names and the truth about the Empire that gave them to me. Across thousands of worlds, Valkyrie citizens stopped what they were doing to watch. Servants and nobles, soldiers and merchants, the powerful and the weak, all of them listened as the hidden princess finally spoke. I was born without psionic abilities, and for 30 years I believed that made me worthless. I believed what my father and my sisters told me, that I was a mistake, an embarrassment, a creature barely worthy of life. Her voice grew stronger, but it was all a lie. She explained everything. The nature of her null field, her human mother's sacrifice, the centuries of psionic tyranny that had convinced common Valkyrie that they deserved to be ruled by those with stronger minds. My father does not rule because he is wise or just or good, Lyra declared. He rules because he can crush the thoughts of anyone who disagrees with him. He maintains power through fear and mental domination, not through the consent of his people. And he fears me because I am the one person in this empire that his power cannot touch. The Emperor watched the broadcast from his throne room, surrounded by his remaining loyal guards and the daughters, who had fled from the shattered nebula. His ancient face twisted with rage as his youngest child exposed secrets that had been buried for generations. Destroy that transmission, he commanded. But his technicians shook their heads helplessly. The broadcast was coming from too many sources to stop, spreading through the empire like a fire that could not be contained on the screen. Lyra made her offer. The age of psionic tyranny ends today. Those who ruled through mental domination will answer for their crimes, and those who wish to build something new will have a place in what comes next. She looked directly into the camera, and millions of viewers felt as though she was speaking to them personally. The humans taught me something important. Power does not make a species great. What makes a species great is what they do when they have no power, how they treat those who are weaker, what they build when no one can force them to build it. I have lived my whole life without power, and I survived. I learned to think clearly, to see the truth, to find strength in myself rather than in domination of others. Now I am asking you to do the same. The broadcast ended, but its effects were just beginning on worlds throughout the Empire. Common Velkari began to whisper among themselves. These were people with weak or average psionic abilities. People who had spent their lives being dominated by the noble classes. People who had always known something was wrong but had been too afraid to name it. They looked at each other and saw, perhaps, for the first time, not competitors to be dominated, but neighbors, who shared their suffering on military bases. Soldiers who had always resented the psionic officers who controlled their thoughts began to question their orders. Why should they die to protect an emperor who viewed them as tools rather than people? On merchant ships, crews started talking about a future where business success depended on skill rather than mental manipulation, where contracts could be negotiated fairly instead of being forced through psionic coercion. The Empire did not fall in a single day, but the cracks that Lyra's broadcast created spread faster than anyone expected. Marcus led a fleet of human ships and captured Velkari vessels toward the core worlds, but they rarely had to fight. System after system declared for Lyra, their governors choosing a future of freedom over a past of tyranny. The princesses scattered, each one facing a different fate. Some fled to distant regions of space, hoping to rebuild their power far from their sisters' influence. Others surrendered and begged for mercy. A few even joined Lyra's cause, recognizing that the old ways could not survive, and throughout it all, Lyra grew into the leader her mother had always believed she could become. She traveled from world to world, walking among the people, letting them feel her null field and understand that they had nothing to fear from her. Where the Emperor had ruled through terror, she led through example. I cannot promise that the future will be easy, she told crowds on 100 different planets. Building something new is always harder than destroying something old. But I can promise that in the new empire, no one will be valued only for the power they were born with. We will be judged by our choices, our work, our kindness to one another. We will be free. The final battle came not with weapons, but with abandonment. Emperor Thalver barricaded himself in his palace with his remaining guards, certain that his loyal forces would never desert him. But one by one, those forces melted away as Lyra's fleet entered orbit. Soldiers who had served for centuries decided they no longer wished to fight for a ruler who saw them as slaves. When Lyra finally walked into the throne room, her father sat alone on his crystal throne, an ancient creature who had forgotten how to exist without absolute power. You have destroyed everything I built, he said, his voice hollow with defeat. No, Lyra replied calmly. I have freed everything you imprisoned. She did not kill him. That would have made her a tyrant like him. Instead, she let him live out his final years in exile, stripped of power, surrounded only by silence. The same silence he had forced his daughter to endure for 3 decades. It was, perhaps, the cruelest mercy imaginable. 1 year after the broadcast that changed everything, the Treaty of New Dawn was signed in the ceremony watched by beings across the galaxy. The document established a formal alliance between the reformed Velkari Republic and the United Human Confederacy, the first interspecies partnership in galactic history built on equality rather than conquest. Ambassador Marcus Kang stood beside his wife, Empress Consort Lyra, as the treaty was sealed with signatures and symbols from both civilizations. The other powers are nervous, a human diplomat commented quietly. They think we won because of our weapons and tactics. Marcus shook his head. Let them think that. The real victory was never about firepower. He looked at Lyra, who was speaking with former nobles, now learning to live as equals among their people. The real weapon was always her. We just helped her see what she had been all along. Lyra caught his glance and smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face with warmth her family had never seen. She excused herself from the conversation and walked to his side. "My father offered you an empire," she said softly. "And I got one," Marcus replied. Just not the way he expected. They stood together at the viewport, watching ships from both species flying side by side, human vessels and Valkyrie cruisers sharing the same space without fear or dominance. "What happens now?" Lyra asked. "Now we show the rest of the galaxy what happens when species work together instead of trying to control each other." He took her hand. "Now we build something that has never existed before, a future where strength means lifting others up, not pushing them down. Now we prove that my mother and all the humans who died for this dream were right to believe in you." Lyra squeezed his hand and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, other empires were watching nervously. They had seen what happened when humans found value where others saw weakness. When a single defective princess brought down a galactic power, they were right to be nervous because humanity was just getting started, and they had learned something important from this first great victory. The greatest weapons were not ships or soldiers or psionic powers. The greatest weapons were hope, freedom, and the courage to see the truth. The Valkyrie had learned that lesson now. Everyone else would too.